Kojiki, the death of the goddess. 1. In the very beginning, when the world was created, first the heavens and the earth were formed. Along with this, our ancestors, the gods known as Ame no Minaka Nushi no Kami, who was the most ancient of the Japanese gods, was born in the high celestial realm called Takamagahara. Next, the gods Takami Musubi no Kami and Kami Musubi no Kami, two divine beings, were born. At that time, both the heavens and the earth had not yet fully solidified. Instead, they remained in a liquid-like state, as if floating with oil, gently drifting like jellyfish. Into this, just as buds begin to sprout, these two gods were born. Following them, two more gods, a male and a female deity, were born, and after them, 8 gods in total, male and female, came into existence. Eventually, the male god Izanagi no Kami and the female goddess Izanami no Kami were born. Amaterasu Amakami, the god of the celestial realm, summoned these two deities and said, "Those of you who float in this land, solidify it and create the land of Japan." And thus, he bestowed upon them a magnificent spear. And so, the two of them immediately ascended to the Ame no Ukahashi, a floating bridge in the clouds, and with the spear they had been given, they stirred up the soft, sticky land below. When they withdrew, the tip of the spear, having touched the salty water, began to drip, and the drip solidified into a small island. The two gods descended to the island, built a palace there, and made their home. First, they created Awaji Island, and then Iyo, Sanuki, Awa, Tosa, the islands of Shikoku, and next, the island of Oki. Then, they created the region known as Tsukushi, which is the present-day Kyushu, as well as the islands of Iki, Tsushima, and Sato. Lastly, they formed Honshu, the largest island, which was shaped like a lizard, and named it Oyamata Toi Atsushima. Thus, starting from Awaji Island, a total of 8 islands were created. Therefore, in the beginning, Japan was referred to as Oishimaguni, the land of the 8 great islands, and also known as Toyo-Ashihara no Mizuho no Kuni, the land of abundant rice fields. With the land finally formed, the two gods next gave birth to many other deities, including the gods of wind, sea, mountains, fields, rivers, and fire. However, tragically, when Izanami gave birth to the fire god, she was burned and succumbed to her injuries. Izanagi, in great sorrow, said, "Ah, my wife, to lose you over the birth of just one child." He wept bitterly and, after his mourning, buried her body in the mountains of Hiba, at the boundary of the provinces of Izumo and Hoki. The goddess then descended into Yomi no Kuni, the land of the dead, a dark and shadowy realm. Izanagi, heartbroken, drew forth the long sword known as the Tatsuka no Tsurugi and, in his grief, immediately slew the fire god, who had caused the misfortune. However, the sorrow of the gods could not be healed by such an act. Filled with a deep longing, Izanagi decided to follow his wife into the dark realm of Yomi to reunite with her. 2. Naturally, the goddess had already arrived at the palace of the god of Yomi, the land of the dead. When her husband, the god Izanagi, arrived to visit from far away, the goddess hurriedly went to the door to greet him. Izanagi called out to her from the darkness, saying, "My beloved wife, the land we were to create together is still not complete. Please, come back with me." The goddess, filled with sorrow, replied, "If you had come sooner, it would have been better. But I have already eaten the food cooked by the impure fire of this land, so I can never return. However, since you have come all this way, I will consult with the gods of Yomi. Please, during this time, do not look upon my form, no matter what happens. I beg of you." She firmly warned him and then withdrew into the inner chambers of the palace. Izanagi waited patiently by the door for a long time, but the goddess did not emerge. Eventually, unable to wait any longer, Izanagi took a comb from his hair, removed one of its large teeth, lit it with fire, and, using it to light his way, he ventured deep into the palace, stepping carefully in the dark. When he reached the innermost part of the palace, he found the goddess lying there. As he looked at her by the light, he was horrified. Her entire body had decayed and rotted, covered in a sickening stench. Maggots swarmed over her body. Moreover, from her head, chest, stomach, thighs, arms, and legs, there were 8 thunder gods, each with terrifying faces, crouching in the filth of her decay. Izanagi, shocked by the sight, was so horrified that he immediately fled in fear. The goddess suddenly sat up and said, "Ah, despite my warnings, you have finally seen my true form. How detestable you are. You have made me so ashamed. Ah, how frustrating." She became furious, and immediately summoned her evil female demons. "Quickly, catch that god," she commanded through gritted teeth. The evil demons, shouting "Wait for us," began to chase after him. Izanagi, realizing that being caught by these demons would be disastrous, pulled out leaves from his black comb and threw them behind him as he ran. As soon as the leaves fell, they turned into clusters of grapes. The female demons, seeing the grapes, immediately stopped to pick and eat them. Meanwhile, Izanagi continued to run as fast as he could, thinking he had gained a little distance. But soon, the demons caught up with him once again. "I must do something," he thought, and this time, he pulled out his right comb, broke off its teeth, and began throwing them behind him. The teeth turned into bamboo shoots as they fell. The demons, seeing the bamboo shoots, immediately stopped and began to pull them out of the ground and munch on them. Izanagi, seizing the opportunity, managed to escape quite a distance. Feeling that he had finally gotten away, he turned around to check behind him. To his surprise, the 8 thunder gods who had been with the goddess were now leading an army of 1,500 demons, desperately chasing after him. Seeing this, Izanagi hurriedly drew his Tatsuka no Tsurugi, the 10-handled sword, and, wielding it, began cutting fiercely behind him as he ran for his life. With all his strength, he managed to escape, and at last, he reached the foot of Yomatsu Hirosaka, the slope that marked the boundary between the world of the living and the land of Yomi. 3. At the foot of the slope, there was a peach tree. Izanagi took 3 peaches and, as the demons drew near, he threw the peaches with all his strength. The thunder gods were so surprised that they scattered in all directions and fled. Izanagi looked at the peaches and said, "From now on, whenever anyone in Japan faces hardship, may you, as you helped me today, come to their aid." He then gave the peach tree the name Okansumi no Mikoto, great god of the fruit of the peach. At this point, the goddess, growing impatient, decided to pursue him herself. When Izanagi saw this, he quickly grabbed a large boulder nearby and pushed it to block the entrance of the slope. The goddess, unable to move past the stone, glared at it in frustration and said, "My husband, if you do this, I will kill 1,000 people each day throughout Japan, so beware." Izanagi replied, "My wife, if you do such a terrible thing, I will cause 1,500 children to be born every day in Japan, and I will not care." With that, Izanagi turned and made his way back home. He said, "Ah, I have been to a filthy place. I must hurry and wash my body to cleanse myself of this impurity." He traveled to Awakihara in the land of Hyuga, where a beautiful river flowed. There, he threw his staff into the river and began removing his belt, undergarments, outer garments, crown, and the armlets from his arms. Each time he removed an item, one by one, 12 gods were born. As Izanagi looked at the river's flow, he said, "Upstream, the rapids are swift. Downstream, the rapids are weak." He then chose a place in the middle of the river with just the right flow, stepped into it, and immersed himself in the water, washing his entire body. As he did so, 2 calamity-bringing gods were born from the impurities on his body. In order to counter these calamities, Izanagi then gave birth to 3 good gods. After submerging himself in the water to purify his body, 2 more gods were born. Then, as he rinsed his body in the water, 2 more gods appeared. Afterward, when he came out of the water to finish his purification, 2 more gods were born. Finally, when he washed his left eye, a beautiful and noble goddess was born. Izanagi named her Amaterasu Amakami, the great goddess Amaterasu. Next, when he washed his right eye, the god Tsukuyomi no Mikoto, the god of the moon, was born. Lastly, when he washed his nose, the god Takahayasu Sano no Mikoto, the god Susano, was born. Izanagi looked at these 3 gods and said, "I have fathered many children, but at last, I have given birth to the most wonderful children. He was greatly overjoyed and immediately removed his precious necklace, which made a soft tinkling sound, and presented it to Amaterasu Amakami. He said, "You shall ascend to the heavens and rule over Takamagahara, the high celestial plane." He then told Tsukuyomi no Mikado, "You shall rule over the realm of night." Finally, he instructed Susanoo no Mikado, "You shall rule over the great oceans."